Welcome everyone. This is the first nuclear book club in our Doomsday Library. I had promised to start it a couple of months back, but if you follow me on Patreon, you will know that there's been a lot of stuff happening recently in my life, which has pushed us back a bit. But here we are. Fingers crossed, nothing else will go wrong. My podcasts are always scripted, because I learned long ago that if I don't script them, I go off tangent and talk about random things, and the podcast balloons to being about 3 hours long. Some people might like that more casual, relaxed vibe, but I prefer to stick to the subject. I don't like any fluff or filler in podcasts. So they are always strictly scripted. But the book club, which you're watching now, is firstly, obviously, a video, not a podcast. And I'm not going to script it. I've got the book here, The Chrysalids by Wyndham, and I've got a bunch of notes that I've made, of course, but I am not following any script, because the idea with the book club is that it's going to be different, of course, from the weekly podcasts, but it's going to be more casual, so there's no script. I have my tea here, got my tea, got my book, got a few notes, got the dog in the other room with my husband, who's on leave this week, so there'll be no interruptions from the dog, Gadget. So let's just go ahead with this casual video style and see how we get on with it. This is the first, as I said, in the Doomsday Library series. I've made it free to everyone on Patreon, it's on YouTube, anyone can see it, but if you love it and want to watch the subsequent Doomsday Library videos, you will have to subscribe, you'll have to become a patron. If you want to become a patron, please look at patreon.com/atomichobo. So here we are with The Chrysalids by Wyndham. The idea with the Doomsday Library is we will look at nuclear books, not necessarily fiction, not necessarily non-fiction. It will be a big mixture, a big stramash, as they say. Some weeks fiction, some weeks not. The only thing which will connect all the books is that they have to be about nuclear war in some way. So The Chrysalids by Wyndham is set about 2,000 years in the future after a nuclear holocaust, what they refer to as the tribulation. And it is set in the north, the far north, in Canada, in the town of Labrador, or the area of Labrador. And being up there, of course, they escaped the worst of the nuclear attack. Of course, Labrador is quite isolated, wouldn't be a nuclear target. So although they were hit and have suffered terrible things, as we will see, their civilization did survive, and they are still there 2,000 years later, still trying to put things right. But it's their method of putting things right. It's whether their method is indeed right, which gives us the plot and the tension in The Chrysalids. So before we start with that, let's just look at who Wyndham was. He was a British writer, publishing sci-fi in the 50s. That was his golden period. But he didn't write typical macho sci-fi about robots and rockets, that type of thing. Obviously there's more to that type of sci-fi than robots and rockets, but that's the way I've always seen it. I've got no interest in that type of thing which dwells on the technology. I like what I've come to learn is called speculative fiction, which is, yes, it might be set in the future, but we will speculate on how humanity has evolved or not evolved to cope with it. What do people do? How do people react in this weird future? So we are not tangled up in technology. And that's what we see in The Chrysalids. People in this hideous, deformed society, 2,000 years after the bomb, trying to cope with things. So Wyndham, speculative fiction, a kind of more gentle or thoughtful kind of sci-fi. His most famous novel, of course, is The Day of the Triffids, which I love. If you've seen the famous film 28 Days Later, with that famous opening scene where what's his name is wandering through London, deserted London, that's taken from or inspired by surely, the first scene or the first chapter of The Day of the Triffids. I won't talk too much about The Day of the Triffids because, as I've said, I will go on and on, off in a tangent, and we'll be here all day, and we will realise that the whole book club has been about a different novel, about The Day of the Triffids. But I love that novel. I loved it so much that it literally put me in hospital. I was at university at the time, living in a horrible high-rise flat in Maryhill, and in order to get to the university from the horrible high-rise flat, I had to walk through the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow, which are obviously beautiful. And I was walking to university, escaped the misery of the high-rises, cut through the lovely botanics, and I thought, I must sit here in the sun. I need to get to a lecture, of course, but I'll just take 10 minutes. I'll read this bit of this novel I've got, The Day of the Triffids, in my bag. I'll just read chapter 1. What harm can it do? It won't make me late for university. I'll still make the lecture in time. I will sit here in the sunny splendour of the botanics and read one tiny chapter. How late could that make me? So I sat down it was the middle of a heat wave, which obviously are rare in Glasgow. Didn't have any water with me. I didn't have any suntan cream on because I was a stupid 21-year-old. And I thought, well, I won't be here for very long anyway. One chapter. Well, the one chapter was so magnificent and so gripping that I sat there. I was probably there for hours. I could not put the book down. I was there for hours in that blistering heat with no water, with no shade, with no suntan cream. And of course I got sunstroke. And so in the days following, I was ill, I was sick, I was weak, I couldn't keep any food down. And I did have to go into hospital. My stepfather at one point had to drive over to get me, take me up to A&E because I was so ill and I hadn't eaten for about 5 days. And it was all because of The Day of the Triffids. Now, of course, now being 45, if I heard of some wee daft student who'd taken up the valuable resources of the NHS because they were stupid enough to sit out in a heat wave without water or without sun protection or even a hat, just because they were stuck in a great novel, I would think, what an idiot. But I was an idiot, but I was only 21 and it was all because of The Day of the Triffids. It was so brilliant. Yes, it put me in hospital. But we're not talking about The Day of the Triffids. We're talking about his other novel, or one of his other novels, The Chrysalids. But before we move on, let's exploit the fact that we're not scripted here to talk about another great book. This one did the reverse. If The Day of the Triffids made me ill and put me in hospital, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier did the opposite. I read Rebecca when I was, I think, 15, and I'd been really ill. I'd had flu, something which was genuinely quite nasty, and I was living with my gran at the time, thank God, so Gran was looking after me, so I was tucked up in bed, and I was recovering from the flu at this point, but still ill enough to be in bed, and Gran would plod upstairs every now and then to bring me tea or some water, check my temperature, bring me some paracetamol, and I was reading Rebecca at the time. And whenever Gran came into the room to check on me and she saw that I was reading, she would tut and say, "That's no good, hen. That will hurt your eyes, give yourself a headache. You need to be sleeping. Put the book down." So I couldn't put the book down though, because like Day of the Triffids, oh my God, it was absolutely killing me. So when I heard Gran's footsteps creaking up the stairs, I would just shove the book under the bed covers. But as soon as Gran left the room, I would get the book out again. It was brilliant. Now, Rebecca's a very famous novel, of course. You probably know the story of Rebecca. If you don't, I won't spoil it for you, other than to say there is a huge twist in it, a magnificent twist. And I was reading the novel, and when I came to the twist, I was so shocked that I remember this so clearly. I sat bolt upright in bed, and the shock of the novel, the way it jarred me, I think that it jarred the flu, or the remnants of the flu, right out of me. So I can say it cured me of the remnants of the flu. Those last few days where you're not quite right, Rebecca chased the flu from me. It exorcised the lingering misery that was there, because, oh my God, the shock of the twist. So yes, some books can be so great they put you in hospital. Some books can be so great that they help you recover from the flu. And I was talking to my sister recently, Jen, who loves novels with twists. And so I recommended Rebecca to her, and she turned up her nose at it because, oh, it's an old-fashioned book set in the 30s, I think. She likes modern stuff. But I said, please, if you like twists, this is the king of all twists. This cured me of the flu. That's how good the twist is. And she read it, and when she came to the twist, she went, yeah, obviously. I saw that coming a mile off. So Jen is in her 40s. She's my younger sister. So maybe that was the difference. If you read it as a woman in your 40s versus a daft wee teenager in bed with the flu at 15, maybe that's the difference. But all I can say is, if you want twists, please try Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Especially if you're 15, which is when it got me. I would never recover from the shock of that. I've never read it again, even though I loved it, because I can never recreate the moment of discovering that twist, because now I know what the twist is. But oh my God, so yes, novels which can put you in hospital and novels which can cure you of the flu. The Chrysalids didn't do either. It didn't cure me of anything or put me in hospital, but still a very good novel. Certainly not as famous as the Day of the Triffids or The Kraken Wakes. That's maybe another very famous one of his. The Midwich Cuckoos, again, quite a famous one. Chalky. There are loads of great John Wyndhams. But yeah, The Chrysalids isn't up there in terms of fame. The Day of the Triffids takes that, I think. But we're here because we're dealing with nuclear war. So, a brief overview of the plot, because in this book club, we're not going to just talk about the plot, because some novels, of course, depend on the plot. If they're a thriller, for example, obviously they're all about plot, but then they're easily worn out, because once you've read a thriller and you know what the plot twists are, what's the point in reading it again? Although there is one thriller which I've read more than once, Kerensky Heights, that's a Cold War thriller. The Day of the Jackal is another magnificent thriller. So yes, there are thrillers which are good enough that they bear being read more than once. But with the Chrysalids, we're not really here for the plot. We're here for the ideas of the Chrysalids. I'm going to keep calling it the Day of the Triffids. We are here for the ideas of the Chrysalids, because we're all here, of course, for the nuclear war. So it's set, as I said, 2,000 years, maybe 3,000 years in the future, after nuclear holocaust. It's set in the far north, in Labrador, or in the region of Labrador. And we have a society which is religious. And the reason they have become religious, or that they have clung perhaps to religion, is because they think what they have to do is get back to where society was before this nuclear war. Now, of course, they don't refer to it as nuclear war. They don't know what it was that happened. They just know there was some great horror, some great cataclysm, and they refer to it in religious terms or biblical terms as the tribulation. Now, they don't know about atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, neutron bombs. They don't know about any of that. They are quite primitive. They have not yet clawed their way back to the advanced society that created the tribulation. But of course, a theme running through the book is, why the hell would you want to claw your way back to that when it led to this great horror, to this great devastation? So the people in our society, or at least in the small area that we're looking at, those who live in Labrador, or Wacknock as it's called, they think what we must do, the only thing there is to do, is to claw our way back to a state of grace, to join, as they refer to us, the old people. We are to them the old people. The old people were clever, they were civilized, they had it all going on. And then there was something terrible which happened called the tribulation. And it's left us with lots of horror, with lots of, as they call it, deviations. And by deviations, they mean what we would understand as genetic mutations, of course, caused by the radiation. They don't know about that. They don't know about the science behind it. They just know that every now and then something or someone or a plant is grown or born or comes along which is a deviation from the norm. So that might be something as hideous as a person with 2 heads or 4 eyes or an extra limb or an extra toe. And that appears in the novel. There's a little girl called Sophie who was born with an extra toe, a tiny, tiny little difference. But in this world, in the world of Whacknuck, that means she is a hideous deviation and must be killed, because their goal, as I said, is to claw their way back to being like the old people. That is to have 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, to be in the image of God. And anything which deviates from that must be wiped out. Because if you allow these deviations to flourish and to recreate, then you are clawing a different path. You're taking humanity off into a different path, whereas as far as they're concerned, there is only one path, and that is the one true path, which will take us back to being like the old people. We must follow the old people. We must look like the old people, and nothing else can be permitted. So if it's a child or an animal which is born with a deviation, it has to be killed. If there are plants which are born which have deviations, then they must be burned. In the old days of Whacknuck, of this society, they would burn people who were deviations. But that has softened slightly as the years went past. And now what might happen is that these people with the deviations are sent into exile, if you like. They are sent into what is known as the fringes. So Whacknuck obviously escaped the worst of the radiation, so they have been able to civilise themselves physically. They've been able to create farmland again and to build houses and to settle a community. And they are desperately trying to keep it clean, if you like. So any deviations must be wiped out, either killed or exiled out to the fringes. The fringes being the untamed land where things start to get a bit rough, a bit dangerous. And beyond the fringes is where it gets worse still. So we can imagine that's where the radiation was even worse. And those areas are called the Badlands. So you have your nice little core of what they call civilization. That then falls into the fringes, and the fringes then falls further into the Badlands. But even worse than the Badlands are what are called the Black Coasts. So let's read our description of the Badlands first. Our chief character, our narrator of the novel, David, is a young boy, and he's brought up by a very religious, strict father who wants nothing more than to exile and kill all the mutants, all the deviations. But his uncle Axel is a bit more open-minded, a bit more of a free thinker. He has travelled. He has managed to sail south a few times. And he kept a diary of what he saw down there. Now, of course, if they're up in Labrador, up in the north in Canada, and they've sailed south, they are, of course, approaching, eventually, areas around Boston, New York, etc. So we can imagine that they were hit very hard with the nuclear war, because, of course, in the Cold War, they are the areas that would have been nuclear targets. So he has seen the Badlands, and he has seen, even worse, the Black Coasts. So firstly, here's a description of the Badlands. This is a dreadful country indeed. We have never seen Badlands before, but none of us has ever imagined anything quite so terrible as this. There are stretches miles across where it looks as if all the ground has been fused into black glass. There is nothing else. Nothing but the glass, like a frozen ocean of ink. And then belts of Badlands. Then another wilderness of black glass. It goes on and on. What did they do here? What can they have done to create such a frightful place? No wonder none of us ever came this way before. It's like going over the rim of the world into the outskirts of hell. It must be utterly beyond hope. barred to any kind of life forever and ever. There was the power of gods in the hands of children, we know. But were they mad children? All of them quite mad? The mountains are cinders, and the plains are black glass, still after centuries. It's so dreary, a monstrous madness. It's frightening to think a whole race could go insane. So that's an interesting thing about the chrysalids. Some people think that the old ones, us, we who started the nuclear war, clearly went insane, as in we got it wrong. We were idiots, we were savages, we were brutes. We ruined everything, we killed everything. A whole race insane. Whereas you have people like David's dad, for example, who are very, very strict, and they think, as I said earlier, there is one true path, and that is to get back to the way the old people were. So he's not questioning, what did the old people do wrong? And why did they get it so wrong? And if they did get it so wrong, why on earth would you want to get back to that way of thinking, to that way of living? Wouldn't you want another path? But no, as far as these people are concerned, there is one true path, and there is one true image, and everything that deviates from it must be killed or wiped out or exiled to the Badlands. But there is hope in that there are some free thinkers who have to keep their heads down. But they think, why would you want to get back to that when they got it so wrong? It's frightening to think a whole race could go insane. So these are the Badlands, and then beyond the Badlands and further south, as I said, on the coast, you get the Black Coasts. And it says here, if you keep sailing south, soon you come to stretches of coast and land behind it, 20, 30, 40 miles long maybe, where nothing grows, nothing at all. So down here on the Black Coast, you don't even get deviations, you don't even get plants that have grown into weird gnarled shapes. There's nothing on the Black Coasts. So nothing grows, nothing at all. The whole seaboard is empty, black and harsh and empty. The land behind looks like a huge desert of charcoal. Where there are cliffs, they are sharp-edged and with nothing to soften them. There are no fish in the sea, no weed either, not even slime. And when a ship has sailed there, the barnacles and the fouling on her bottom drop off and leave her hull clean. You don't see any birds. Nothing moves at all except the waves breaking on the black beaches. So that is the Black Coast. That is, I assume from what he's describing, that is the stretch of America where we have, or we would have had, Boston, New York, etc. The chief nuclear targets, of course. And this description here, you don't see any birds, nothing moves at all, except the waves breaking on the black beaches. That reminds me, of course, of the description in the landscape in The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point in our book club. I had suggested it for next month's book club, but I was outvoted by the rest of my patrons. The voting has gone for Alas Babylon by Pat Frank. But yes, this description reminds me so much of The Road. Nothing moves except the waves breaking on the black beaches. In The Road, Cormac McCarthy often describes how nothing moves except the ash on the wind. And I think that's one of the best images I've ever read. Nothing moves except the ash on the wind. And here we have nothing moving except the waves on the black beaches. I love seeing connections between all these nuclear war novels. So we have one there with Cormac McCarthy's The Road. There is also one, it's a huge connection, of course. The Chrysalids talks about cycles. It suggests that humanity, is going to repeat the cycle. Because the people up in Wacknock, in the area of Labrador, those who are in power and have influence at least, want humanity, as I've said, to regain what the old people had, what we had. So that suggests they are going to, if they are successful, simply plod in the same circle, recreate the cycle, and perhaps the risk there is they will do it all over again. And that's the theme, or one of the themes that we have in the brilliant nuclear war novel Ridley Walker. I covered Ridley Walker in a podcast episode. If you're new here, my podcast is Atomic Hobo. Ridley Walker and also another brilliant nuclear war novel, A Canticle for Leibowitz, they obsess over the theme that mankind is trapped in the cycle. They will destroy themselves in a nuclear holocaust, and then when they are scrabbling around in the ashes, centuries or even thousands of years later, they will eventually build their way back to where they were before. They will pick up sticks and recreate fire. They will then, or rediscover how to make fire. They will learn how to create weapons. And the thinking is they will eventually claw their way back through science and technology to building the nuclear bomb again. And unless they also learn other things, such as how to be more mature this time around, how to be more enlightened, more civilized, less violent, then the implication is, or the suggestion is, that perhaps they will just blow it all up all over again. And when they find themselves scrabbling around in the dirt again, will they keep treading round in the same circle? And that's what the Chrysalids is hinting at here, I think. If they are so obsessed with following and sticking to the true path, sticking with the same image, only one image of man is acceptable. And by that they mean one physical image, of course. You know, that's why they fear the wee girl Sophie, or why she has to run and hide, because she has an extra toe. They want the physical image of man to be uniform. No deviations will be tolerated. Watch thou for the mutant, as it goes. But I think this also means no other ways of thinking will be tolerated. So you free thinkers who might want to resolve problems and differences in other ways other than clubbing one another over the head and going to war and eventually starting nuclear war, you lot won't be tolerated either. There will be one physical image of man, and that implies to me that they will tolerate one way of thinking. And that's why Uncle Axel is so important in the book, because he talks to young David, and he, as a free thinker, he's travelled, he's seen the Badlands, he's seen the Black Coasts, and he's questioning what happened to make them that way, rather than just resorting to, the biblical language of, the tribulation was visited upon us. What was the tribulation? Where did it come from? Who started it? Why did it start? And if the old people did it, why are we so keen to get back to their way of living, their way of thinking? So the Chrysalids seem to be telling us that one way of looking and existing, one physical way of looking and existing is acceptable, and one way of thinking is acceptable. And to me that implies, as with Ridley Walker and A Canticle for Leibowitz, that's going to trap us in one cycle that we can't get out of. And of course, the very title of the novel, The Chrysalids, suggests the whole idea of a life cycle and of growing and of becoming something different. Is difference going to be tolerated? If not, then that suggests to me that we are just going to repeat the cycle all over again. But if people like Uncle Axel can break that cycle, then there is perhaps some hope for the human race. And of course, if we think about David himself, he doesn't have a physical difference. Little Sophie does. She has an extra toe. David's difference is in the mind. He has a form of telepathy. And he is able to, through his telepathy, link up with others who have it. Only a tiny, tiny number of people have this, but they are slowly making connections with one another and exploring, what does this telepathy mean? Now, for me, that suggests that they are going to bring in a new way of thinking. They literally have a different way of thinking, a different way of using their mind. If the leaders of the society in Whacknock knew about that, they would be horrified, because of course that's a deviation. That's not the way the human mind is supposed to work. and they want to follow the one true path and the one path only. So he has a deviation, but it's one that can't be seen. It's one that's in his mind. But to me, that suggests optimism. There is a new way of thinking, a new way of existing. And Uncle Axel is giving David permission to go with that, if you like, and to realise it's not an evil. It's not something where the people who have this power have to be exterminated or sent out into exile in the fringes. It is something that might be a good thing. Difference itself might be a good thing. Now, to talk about Uncle Axel again, he's a bit of a free thinker. He questions things. He's still, of course, what we would think of as a bit primitive, because, we can't blame the guy. He's living thousands of years in the future in a primitive society after the nuclear holocaust. And even he has beliefs that we would laugh at these days. Even though he's been out there sailing and exploring and observing, he still thinks that if you sail too far east, quote, the sea goes on forever, or else it comes to an end suddenly, and you sail over the edge. Nobody knows for sure. So of course that's like the old beliefs that we had, that you would, if you were out exploring, you would drop off the edge of the world because the edge was flat, because the world was flat. And of course Uncle Axel, even though he has those beliefs that we might chuckle at, he represents probably figures from the age of exploration, from like the 15th, 16th century, when sailors were out exploring and they didn't know what lay beyond certain sections on the map. The map was blank and they were out there to see what was there, and they didn't know whether they would drop off the edge of the world or what they would find. Would there be dragons? Would there be cities made of gold? So if he represents the age of exploration, if we look at the society back in Wyndham, who are religious, of course, in tone, they remind me, of course, or I suppose they're supposed to represent the Puritans, because they, of course, were a bit Puritan. They didn't like anything rebellious or indecent. They wouldn't have tolerated any dissent. And of course, that's why we had witchcraft trials, of course, over there in New England. If there was anything unexpected or strange or weird, then it must have been witchcraft, and you would burn the witch. So the guys here in Wyndham are doing pretty much the same thing. If they find something different or something which deviates, they will burn or exile or kill, because they want to be pure. No deviation will be tolerated. So yes, they are like the Puritans back in New England, who think they're there to civilise a wild society that they've landed in, or a wild world that they've landed in, that they know best, that their way is the right way. Whereas, as the novel shows us, once you step out of their little corner of the coast and you wade into the fringes or the Badlands, then you find what they would consider savage people. And I suppose that's obviously supposed to be the Puritan attitude to Native Americans when they discovered them. We are here to civilise you, to show you the right way to live. And indeed, when David does enter the fringes and encounters people in that landscape, he's also been taught to fear them, that they are hideous, that they are wrong, that they are unnatural, that they're not fit to be socialised with, that they must be exiled because they are wrong. David is actually quite surprised to find that, these guys, some of them talk about sense. And indeed, David has a discussion with one of them from the fringes where they flip it on its head and say, no, it's you guys in Wacknock. It's you guys who are the baddies. You're the ones who are led by the devil, because you're the ones who are going around burning and exterminating, and who would have a little kid with an extra toe slaughtered. So who's to say you're the good guys and we're the ones who are living according to the devil? So let me find the little discussion that he has here. Yes. David gets a bit of a shock. He's forced to see things from another point of view. So, according to the people in the fringes, it's the ones in Wacknock who are led by the devil or living under the influence of the devil. This guy from the fringes says, it's your parts where the old devil's hanging on and looking after his own. Arrogant they are, the true image and all that. Want to be like the old people. Tribulation hasn't taught them a thing. The old people thought they were the tops too. Knew just how the world ought to be run. And all they had to do was get it fixed up comfortable and keep it that way. Then everybody would be fine on account of their ideas being a whole lot more civilised than God's. Didn't work out, boy. Couldn't work out. They weren't God's last word like they thought. God doesn't have any last word. If he did, he'd be dead. But he isn't dead. He changes and grows like everything else that's alive. So when they thought they were doing their best to get everything fixed up and tidy on some kind of eternal lines they'd thought for themselves, he sent along tribulation to bust it up and remind them that life is change. So there this guy from the fringes, who David had no doubt been taught was savage and stunted and misshapen, is actually talking a lot of sense. And David is intelligent enough to listen and to understand and to think, hang on, as that famous sketch goes, are we the baddies? Now, when the guy from the fringes says they weren't God's last word like they thought, God doesn't have any last word. That reminds me again of the road. Just like threads, everything reminds me of the road. Can't remember the exact quotation, I don't have the book with me, but the guy, the father in the road says something, he's looking at his son, and he says something like, he's the word of God. Surely he's the word of God, and if he isn't, then God never spoke. And that reminds me, of course, of the road here. They weren't God's last word. God doesn't have any last word. If he did, he'd be dead. But he isn't dead. He changes and grows like everything else that's alive. So, to put it very bluntly, change is good. Change is natural. That's what this guy from the fringes is saying. Change is good. Change is natural. It must be allowed to happen. And of course, the idea is if it doesn't happen, you are just going to do the same thing all over again. Again, the theme of Ridley Walker, the theme of A Canticle for Leibowitz. You have to break out of the cycle. What's the point in copying and idolising and trying to recreate a civilization who ruined everything? Who literally ruined everything? Who have created the black coasts where nothing grows? Who've created the Badlands? And who now, thinking they're good, are out there slaughtering and burning and exiling people. Slaughtering and burning crops and animals too. They're supposed to be the good guys. If there's to be any hope, you have to step off that path and think of it differently. And it's the people in the fringes who are doing that. So they must be the enlightened ones. They're the ones who are having different thoughts and who are therefore suggesting that there might be hope for us. And why are they the ones who are having these different thoughts? Is it because they're living in the fringes? Is it because their life is harder? Is it because their life is more challenging? Again, this is a meme I see a lot on Twitter that I can't remember the exact wording of it. But bad times create tough people, and tough people create good times. So if we see that here, the bad times, i.e. living in the fringes where life is rough, where life is hard, has created people who are able to think and to challenge things and to say, bloody hell, we don't need to live like this. What can we do to make things better? Whereas the ones up in Wacknock who are stuck thinking we must follow one path and one only, surely they're condemned just to recreate the misery that brought us here. But also nothing is going to flourish. Nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to evolve. Because when it does, it gets killed or burned or exiled. So a society where there is no free thinking, where you don't challenge anything, where you don't debate anything, and where physically nothing's allowed to change, how can that be a good thing? Now, if we look back to when John Wyndham wrote this in the 50s, that line of thinking was probably quite daring, because the 50s, of course, were typically a time of conformity. And so for him to write this novel saying or advocating that we challenge things, if we burn everything down, we can look upon that as a chance to rebuild and to do it all differently this time around. Obviously, this was the post-war era where a lot of Europe particularly, and of course Japan, had been destroyed, burned to the ground, and was in the process of being rebuilt. And here was this great writer saying this annihilation could be a chance for regrowth if we question things and do things differently. Why would we just plod along in the same path? So the message, destruction is hideous and terrible, but if you handle it properly, it could be a chance to renew and to do things differently. And indeed, our guy from the Fringes, he had that approach. He said to David that is their great sin, the people back in Wacknock who are trying to follow the one true path. They try to strangle life out of life, as in when they find a difference, a deviation, they kill it. They try to strangle life out of life. So there's some hope here. It's a novel, of course, about nuclear holocaust, but we are being given hope because the religious guys, the Puritan types in Wacknock, they're trying to civilise, put that in wee quotes, trying to civilise the world. They've got their little area which they're farming and civilising, and they're trying to gradually expand out into the fringes and civilise the fringes. And of course, if you look at the original Puritans who were trying to... if we look at the original Puritans who were trying to do that with New England, they succeeded. They did keep extending westward. This time around, are the religious guys on the coast going to do that? Because the people in the fringes, as we see, are the ones who are a bit feisty. They're the ones who are, mentally at least, physically they might look a bit odd. A lot of deviations are there and are allowed to flourish. No one is there killing them, burning them. But that seems to give them a bit of a pepperiness to their personality. They are challenging things. They are able to think for themselves. So does it follow that they will eventually succumb to the civilization of the people of Wacknock? Or will the tide turn? Will the people in the fringes eventually take over the people of Wacknock and challenge their way of thinking, challenge this obsession they have with the one true image and following the one true path? Or will there be some kind of nice, friendly mingling where they both give and take? Those in Wacknock can adopt a bit of free thinking, and those in the fringes can be helped to ease out the damaging deviations that they have, but everyone can learn to embrace the beneficial ones, because there are some beneficial ones. In the novel we hear about gigantic horses. Huge horses have been discovered, and of course that is a deviation. We all know, or they all know, what a horse should look like. But these massive, tough, sturdy horses, I picture them being like big beefy Clydesdale horses, but even bigger. These big lads have been accepted in Wacknock. Some people don't agree with it because they're clearly a deviation, but the authorities have realised, come on, let's be practical, these huge horses are great for farming, for agriculture. They can do the work of like 10 horses. So they allow this deviation to be accepted. They tick a little box. Some people are aggravated by that. They think they're, the hardliners. No deviation should be allowed. But again, that gives a little hint of optimism that if a deviation isn't physically hideous or frightening and it has a whole lot of benefit and advantage to it, then why not allow it? Some people think that's a slippery slope. Once you allow one deviation, then you'll allow loads and we'll become gnarled and hideous and we're straying from the one true path. But again, it suggests to me that even those in Wacknock, even those who are living in this authoritarian society where they are taught to look out for mutations and kill it, even they can be persuaded, or those in charge can, to allow a tiny little bit of change. So that does suggest to me that we might this time be able to step out of the cycle and not, as is hinted with Ridley Walker and as is shown in A Canticle for Leibowitz, repeat the whole hideous thing over and over again. There are suggestions here in the Chrysalids that there are different ways of thinking. Indeed, we see that very literally with the telepathy that seems to have developed with some of them. And that there are people who will question things and challenge things, and when deviation comes along, they will accept it. So the Chrysalid seems to link up or fit in nicely with Ridley Walker and A Canticle for Leibowitz in that it talks about the cycle and whether humanity can stop repeating itself again and again. So I really like this novel. We're not dwelling too much on the plot here, as I said, so I haven't really spoiled it, I would hope, for anyone who hasn't read it yet. But for me, the plot isn't the big deal. It's the ideas of the novel. It's the idea of us being condemned to follow the same path, the same circle, over and over again. To claw our way up to what we would call civilization, technological and scientific knowledge, and then what do we do with that knowledge, with that splendour, with that magnificence? We use it to destroy ourselves. Are we ever going to learn our lesson? Are we ever going to be bold enough or enlightened enough to step out of that? And the Chrysalid suggests that yes, but it's tempered by the fact that David, the main character, has this gift of telepathy. So the suggestion there perhaps is you're going to have to either develop telepathy or develop new ways of thinking. And for humanity as a whole to develop new ways of thinking, that's obviously a massive shift. And it might take millennia to get that right. And do we have enough time for all that? Probably not. So that's a favourite topic of mine when it comes to nuclear war. How do we avoid it? If we've done it before and this is another part of the cycle, how do we avoid it? And I've said before, I don't think we can, because we are still children given this magnificent power, and like silly children, we just trash it, trash everything around us. So I don't see how we could step out of the cycle. There is hope, according to the Chrysalids, but we would have to, as I say, develop new ways of thinking. It's not just a case of let's form the League of Nations or the United Nations and let's all sit down and talk. There would have to be an absolute revolution in how we think, and that's covered here in the novel by David having telepathy. There would have to be some really serious changes in how we think, and I think we're a long way from that. So that is our look at the Chrysalids. Our next nuclear novel for the Doomsday Library is going to be Alas, Babylon by Pat Frank. Every month we will choose a different book. I will put the choice to my Patreons, and you get to vote for the book that you want. So if you'd like this and you're not currently a Patreon, you can join me at patreon.com/atomichobo, where you get various benefits such as ad-free access to the podcast, and you will get the Doomsday Library once a month. You get archive material, etc., etc. I will upload this to Patreon so that those of you who are Patreon members can, if you wish, discuss this in the comments. Perhaps we can get a bit of chat going in the comments about the book. And I will be back next month with our discussion. Unscripted, a wee bit rambling perhaps, but as I say, it's not supposed to be like the podcast. It's supposed to be a bit more free, a bit more relaxed. Next month, back with Alas, Babylon by Pat Frank. Can't believe you lot didn't vote for The Road. We'll do The Road one day, obviously. Plenty of nuclear fiction and non-fiction for us to discuss. If you've followed me on Patreon, you will know that I am currently writing a nuclear novel. I'm loving writing it, but it's very different from the non-fiction that I've written. Again, if you're new here, my non-fiction book is Attack Warning Red, How Britain Prepared for Nuclear War. I haven't been able to sell my second non-fiction book, so I am trying my hand at nuclear fiction. I'm loving writing it, but it's intimidating. It's scarier. I feel far more vulnerable writing it. At least when you're writing non-fiction, you can think, well, if you lot don't like the subject matter, I didn't create the subject. I'm just reporting on what's already done, what's already out there, reporting what was in the archives that I found. So it's almost like you can shrug and say, well, I didn't do it. But with fiction, it's the opposite. I am creating every single bit of it from scratch. It's all me. It's all in here. And wow, yeah, it feels a bit intimidating. You make yourself very vulnerable, I think, writing fiction. But I'm loving it, and I'm writing a lot faster than I'm writing the non-fiction. With writing non-fiction, a lot of it was dependent on money, because I had to have the money to go, to travel, to visit certain archives, certain nuclear bunkers, to interview people. With fiction, I can just do it all from here. I can do it all in my pyjamas with a cup of tea. I made a cup of tea and I've let it go cold. So it's less expensive to write fiction, but it makes you a lot more vulnerable. But I'm enjoying it, and I hope that I can sell it when it's done and that everyone enjoys it here. I've said before that my biggest problem with writing nuclear fiction isn't the writing itself or meeting the word count each day. It's how do you write nuclear fiction which doesn't just feel like a cheapo knockoff copy of Threads. Because if you know me at all, you know that I'm obsessed with Threads. I've seen it 1,000 times. I've studied it so closely. Again, if you're new, there's a ongoing series in my podcast. The podcast is called Atomic Hobo. The series within it is called 4 Minutes of Threads, where I scrutinise the film in 4-minute chunks. So I looked at it in such detail. I'm obsessed with it, and I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this are too. But I'm so obsessed with it that I feel that it colours everything that I do and say and think about nuclear war, even to the extent that I was tipping peas into a colander at the sink, and I saw the scene from Threads where Mr. Kemp is at the kitchen sink and he tips peas into a colander. Even preparing peas for dinner can make me think of Threads. So a big challenge for me in nuclear war fiction is, am I good enough? Do I have enough of an imagination to be influenced by it, obviously, but to step away and do something that is my own? I suppose we'll find out. But thank you for listening. As I say, if you want more of the same, you can get me at patreon.com/atomichobo. I hope I haven't rambled too much because I didn't have a script. But if you like your nuclear war scripted and in little 20-minute segments, then you've got my podcast, Atomic Hobo. Thank you for listening.